All right, guys, today we are going to talk about the reproductive system of both the male and female. And obviously, this is different than a lot of the other systems that we've talked about, which are uniform for both male and female. But obviously, this is the one where we are different. So, by definition, gonads, those are the primary sex organs. And the gonads also produce our sex cells. So, for males, it's sperm. For females, they're eggs. But they also secrete our hormones. Males, most specifically, are involved with testosterone. Females have a few more that are going to regulate the secretion and the maturation of the eggs as well as the menstruation cycle. But as we know, reproduction is certainly a big driving force of nature and able to pass genes on from one generation to the next. So let's first of all talk about the anatomy of the male reproductive system. So obviously the two main parts visually are the penis and also the scrotum. And so the head of the penis, also known as the glans penis, the shaft of the penis, and then within the scrotum, that is where the gametes are actually created. So sperm is created within what are called the germline cells of the testes. The epididymis is kind of this network of tubes where the sperm will actually be activated and mature. And then as far as like ejaculation, it will actually, there's not a direct path per se from the testes right into the shaft, but there will be a pathway that it follows. So we kind of see that in males, there's a little bit of difference, for lack of a better phrase, plumbing that goes on than with females. And so the prostate gland helps with kind of the separation of urination versus ejaculation. And you also have some other regulation that can happen within the male as well. So the testes, again, that is where the sperm are actually going to be created, and that is eventually where the epididymis will also have a big impact of that as well. So speaking of that, this is the epididymis. So the sperm are going to be created within the testes. This epididymis is where they are going to mature. And then from there, there is a duct called the vas deferens that will lead to, and that's where the sperm would go to be released. If you've heard of vasectomy before, a vasectomy is actually kind of the pinching or the burning off of this tube so that sperm is still created, but it's not actually part of the what was in the semen. And so that's kind of, if you've heard of a vasectomy, that is what's happening there. So the epididymis is basically where the sperm are going to go to mature. So again, if I go back, that's kind of in this area, this C shape. So they're created here, they're maturing here, and then they are released through the vas deferens. And again, that carries it up into the ejaculatory duct where it would be released. Prostate glands, it's somewhat of almost like a muscle that is going to control urination as well as some other things. And so within the prostate gland, it's going to help produce semen. So sperm is what's actually going to get a female pregnant, but the semen is going to be a combination of some water, but also it's got a lot of basicness to it because of the acidity of the vagina itself. And there's also some nutrients that are found within that fluid as well. And so those are some of the factors with male reproduction. So semen is a combination of sugar, and that's for energy for the sperm. It's also very basic, as I mentioned, because the vagina is so acidic. And it's also going to basically be where the semen's buffer is for when pregnancy is trying to take place. The scrotum, the sac will actually change based on the temperature. So if it is warm or hot, the scrotum will relatively sag. If the scrotum is cold, it will go up towards the body because the sperm are super sensitive to temperature and temperature changes. So that's something that can happen with males, and that's something that we don't necessarily regulate. So those are some of the examples of the anatomy of the male. Just talking and concluding here with the penis itself. So males can be circumcised or not circumcised, and it's just a extra layer of skin that will basically go over the top of the head of the penis, and oftentimes that is removed, and that's called circumcision. Sperm itself is a one cell, and it's got this tail. It's called a flagella, and allows them to move very, very fast. And the head is actually what contains the DNA. Remember that there's 12 chromosomes in the DNA. Testosterone is huge in impacting the male reproductive system. It all starts in the brain, then it goes to the bloodstream, and then the testes will also influence that as well. Okay, the female. As we talked about with our pregnancy, or we'll talk about with our pregnancy, the clitoris is like the equivalent of the head of the penis in the male, excuse me. Um, and so that is where a lot of sexual arousal and stimulation happens, is in the clitoris as well as in the head of the penis. And the labium are the protective layers basically surrounding the opening of the vagina. And the vagina, very similar, is going to have some different plumbing in terms of the vagina is the sexual opening of the female, where males, it was basically the same opening for both ejaculation and also for urination, where females have a separate location for the urination, and that's the bladder, which opens up to what's called the urethra. And so males, it's the same opening. And here you have the uterus, which is where pregnancy can or could happen. The cervix is basically like the end of the vaginal canal, and the upper part, the protected part, the important part, of course, is the ovary, and that will have a fallopian tube that will send a egg or a mature egg into the uterus if pregnancy has happened. So if you're a sperm, you have to travel up the vagina, you have to go through the cervix, you have to go up the fallopian tube in order to fertilize an egg. The ovary is going to release an egg every 28 days. Sometimes it produces multiple eggs. Sometimes it will produce an egg that's immature or not be able to be fertilized. And so again, if we talk about the pregnancy chapter, there's a lot of things that can happen to help a female get pregnant if they're having troubles on their own. So ovaries, the eggs are already made. So when you are actually, if you're a girl, if you're inside your mom, your eggs are being created when you're your mom. What's happening though is as you mature and go through puberty and you start your menstruation, you're going to start to release more mature eggs that can be fertilized. And so that's the process of ovulation, is when you're releasing that egg that potentially could be fertilized during basically the 13 to 15 days after your period. How that whole process happens. So this is the ovary that we're looking at here. It's released into the fallopian tube area, and there it could be fertilized, or it can also be released after the additional 14 days. Here's kind of some examples of what's taking place. So here you're seeing the ovary. This is the actual egg. Scientists and doctors can actually look at this with a what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say ultrasound. Ultrasound. They can see this in the ultrasound to see if there is an egg that can be fertilized and if it's a mature egg. And that's something that sometimes they'll do to see whether or not a female can become pregnant. Here's, again, just kind of another look at the structure of the female. So again, vaginal is for sexual reproduction. Cervix is at the very end of it. The uterus, which will potentially become the home for the mature egg. Egg is created in the ovary, released in the tubes where it can be fertilized, or it will then be dispelled after the 28 days. Okay, fallopian tubes. They are going to actually receive the egg, the ovulated egg, so the one that potentially could be ready for fertilization, and it's where fertilization actually will take place. It can then attach to the uterus and then become that baby, or that embryo, which could become a baby. Then we get into the structure of the vagina itself, kind of an up close and personal view of it. So we're just seeing here the clitoris, as we said, that's the arousal area. Here you're actually seeing where the urine will come out for the female. This is the actual vaginal opening where the insertion could happen. And then you're also seeing the labia here spread out. So that's just a little external anatomy of the vagina. And then you're talking here, this is just kind of taking a look at how eggs are actually released and how they can become viable. Same thing with the male, and how there are very specific layers of cells, they're called germline cells, that are able to create our sperm and our egg, and that is meiosis that's happening. And remember, meiosis only happens in those areas, it doesn't happen anywhere else. As we have talked about, day 14 is when a female is most likely to be pregnant, because that is when the ovulation is going to happen. That's when the egg is released from the ovary into the fallopian tube, where fertilization potentially could happen. And then we just also want to understand that we are a product of our hormones, and that they control, not only with males but also with females, kind of arousal. They control our enlargement of certain parts, our hair development in certain parts, and so they're a vital part of what allows us to mature over time. Last thing I want to talk about is with females, the production of milk after pregnancy. So mammary glands are specialized parts in the breast, and they are turned off unless hormones will turn them on. So it's two really main hormones that help out with that. You have oxytocin, and then you have prolactin. Those are the two main hormones that are able to help with milk production. So usually that happens after pregnancy, although there can be breast growth during pregnancy. But as far as like the milk actually coming in, it usually is a day or so after pregnancy. All right, that's our discussion of reproductive systems.